Hey guys, it's Istebrak. So this month I'm going to be talking about one of my most difficult studies that was most difficult for me. So I've been recently watching Narcos, and the actor I forgot his name, but his expressions were unbelievable. And I was talking about this in my Instagram post. His anger looked like hunger or lust, and his curiosity looked like flirting, and it's just so wonderful the way he was acting. It's such a diverse range of emotion and expression, and I wanted to capture some of that, and it was all really in the eyebrows for that actor and the cheeks. He's got like these really, really expressive cheeks and a very expressive smile. So I decided to choose him for my study, and I've also been trying to paint more male faces than female faces, just to keep myself in line, just to make sure that I'm not developing an excessively feminine visual library template. So because of that, I've been taking on more male characters that aren't particularly beautiful, that have close-set eyes, a little bit of a bigger, more bulbous nose, and this actor was perfect for that. He is very, very handsome, but in a very masculine way. So I just 3 or 4 days of streaming, 3 hours each. I would just hack away at this until something came out. One of the more difficult things to understand for me in this study was to just trust the reference. That was something that I found was very difficult. The reference that I chose were two references. Both were screenshots from Netflix. And the biggest issue with it was that the lighting was really, really bad. So I couldn't really figure out where details were sitting. So I had to keep going back and adjusting the references, and correcting the contrast, making sure I had enough contrast. Because there was just not enough in that scene. It was just like a 3-second scene, but the angle he was in and the expression he had was so endearing, and also so curious, but still so powerful for the character. So I had to have that reference. So I went and found the scene in the episode. I did a little research and I found it at last. And the scene was just a terrible, terrible, terrible contrast in a dark room. But I still managed to make it work, and there was a lot of drowning light, and contrast was really high for white, not for black. So I had to bring in my own definition of where the blacks might sit on the face. And there was a lot of midtone. So lots of highlight, lots of midtone, no darkness for the other end of the contrast spectrum. So I was stuck trying to make like a focal point without it really behaving like a focal point, because where the focal focus ended up being was in these big, like, drowning whites on the edge of the face, which were not near the eyes. And I had this eye that was the main eye, which is our right eye right here. I had to figure out how to make that the focal point, and that was the most difficult thing, is that the photograph was not reinforcing the eye that was going to be the focal point if the photo was to be a painting, which it ended up being. So remember that your reference is not always going to reinforce your focal point, isn't going to prepare you to understand where your focal point might be. You have to struggle, and you have to force that focal point into the front and center stage. So having the contrast on the far side meant that I had to have some kind of contrast for that eye on the right, instead of all the white being all the way to the left. So what I did in order how I achieved that was just, you'll see in a moment, I hide half the face, and that's because I wanted to make a full face, but because painting a full face can affect your appreciation of a focal point, you have to hide the rest of the face after you finish it minimally, so that you can focus all your rendering power and your focus and your threshold and your patience and all of that. You waste it or spend it all on the eyes per session. So I ended up using an entire 3-hour session just on eyes, because I felt like, I had to really reinforce these. I chose this angle because the actor was looking wonderful in that scene, but the focus was not right, so I had to hide half the face, and that was one way I managed to focus my render, focus all the detail, all my energy on making sure the eye read as the focal point. Another thing that I did was just bring in my own details. I realized there are 3 ways to detail. I've mentioned this hundreds of times before, but there is contrast, or there's edge work. The most important one is edge work, making sure you have sharp edges where they need to be. And then there's contrast, using the right amount of black and white. I already had an issue with that just off the bat because there was not enough black to go around. His eyebrows were thick, but they weren't thick enough to be black. His lashes weren't really there because he was a male. Usually for females, we just depend on eyeliner. His eyes were dark and black, but they were tiny and they weren't really that big to take up a massive amount of space because a focal point is also in size. So increasing the size of the object in the painting can also lead to it being a focal point. But the last one is, of course, detailing, bringing in super details, fine details, surface texture, micro texture. And I had to start doing some of that. And I couldn't do it in a way where I was drawing every single lash because, again, it's a male, and that was the challenge. I was drawing a male. So what I had to end up doing is force some edges and draw in some small hairs and line out any areas around the wrinkles, force edges around the lower parts of the eye, bring in dark circles, darker than they should be, according to the reference. It did end up reading like him, and I did a lot of likeness correction and eyebrow thickness and eyebrow angle. You'll see that I'm constantly correcting the right eye so it can sit perfectly and still, you know, read as the actor and read as the character he was acting, and I'm just constantly adjusting that eye because that eye is the focal importance. The other one, I can get away with it being under-rendered because it's got a massive belt of white. But this one, you see, this is where I start hiding the eye. This is this far eye right here. I already had eyebrow detail in it way too early. And that was a sign that I was panicking. That was a sign that I wasn't feeling like I was creating a focal point where there needed to be one. So as soon as I hit the eye, I realized, okay, there needs to be a darker line under the eyelids. The lower eyelids needs to be a little bit more defined. I need more edge work from the temple leading down into the eyes. And that was pretty much how I managed to balance out. By this time, I already was getting a read. I was getting a response from my viewers. They were already, you know, viewers would just come in. They'd say, oh, is that Narcos? Is that Pablo Escobar and whatever? It's Pablito. And I said, yes, it's Pablito. So I was happy that the likeness was being read, but there was still something missing. And as I've told you guys before, the best way to find your mistakes is to take breaks. So when I took breaks, and I would take like a day break between yesterday's stream and the day that I was working, I would come back and find tons of mistakes. And the way to find the mistakes in my work is to behave like it is not my work. It's the students' work that I picked up from the Critique Hour community or something like that. And that's the way I find mistakes in my work. So I started treating it as not my own. I didn't have any, like, if you remember a certain area of the face that you worked really hard to achieve, you're not going to critique that area. You're going to make that area immune of correction because you remember the pain of the labor pains you had in that kind of section that you were drawing. So, sorry, that's Ossie Cam. I had Ossie on the camera for the live stream. But my cat. But because I put my mind in the teacher's mind and I put my work as the student's work, I ended up repainting areas that I had been working on for hours beforehand. So I ended up replacing the eyelids, shifting the lower eye bags, changing the eyebrows. I'd go in and out of Liquify, just constantly correcting and reconstructing every choice I made. I didn't do any line work because I had the reference and I had a bit of an image in my mind of where I wanted it to look, and I've done enough lines that I didn't feel like I need it. But yeah, that definitely kind of just like not being afraid to tear it apart. And the fear factor was that I wouldn't have a finished piece. I'd have done all this streaming for nothing. But I like to say in my mind that there's no painting process that goes to waste. Even if you throw away the piece, even if no one sees it, it's still a mileage added to your odometer. It's still artometer. It's still something that you can say that you defeated or that you tried, or it's still exercise. It's still a solid study mileage. So because I put my mind there, I shifted my attention back towards a teacher, then an artist looking at their own work, the painting started to succeed. And it was a painting that I truly thought I would fail in. I thought that it was just another attempt. I'm going to let it go, like a bunch of other pieces that I let go and I never published. No one ever saw. And that was that. But I really liked this actor's face. I just had to draw it. I could not watch all these close-ups and the acting and the personality and the suffering and and the story and everything that his face managed to achieve with just a close-up. I had to respond to that. I mean, I'm a portrait artist, and close-ups are my fuel. So I wanted to finish it, and those are the kind of the ways that I managed to succeed just against all odds. Hiding the rest of the face, focusing on the eye, redefining the focus, making some decisions and taking liberties of my own with contrast and detail. Shifting the attention back towards student teacher, so I was looking at my work not as if it was my own work. I removed myself emotionally from it, and I just kept going at it. I really didn't want to stop. I wanted to make it so that the actor's face, specific nuances, the way he would twist his eyebrows were visible. And in some of the comments that when I published it, they did actually say that. They said there's something in the eyes. Of course there's something missing. This is not a complete painting, and it's not a successful painting in my definition of what a successful painting is, but that's because, one, it was a male, and it was something that was particularly difficult for me because the actor's face was so detailed. It was so difficult to capture. So I don't assume that I succeeded in this, but it's definitely, I think, around the eye that I did focus on, which was the right eye, in the final flip version. So the eye that is not in major 3/4 view distortion. That eye I feel like I did succeed in, but there are other areas of the face that fell off because I was so focused on the focal point. It's not a completed background, foreground, colored kind of business. He doesn't have a collar or a shirt or anything like that, so I didn't feel like I need to focus too much on completing the painting and the environment around it, which led to me treating the rest of the face as the environment and not as the part of the focal point, which it should have been. Another critique I would give myself is that I relied way too much on my sharpen tool to bring out some of the detail. I ended up having this kind of like palette knife filter effect around the eyes that I had to keep correcting because I felt like, okay, I'm not getting any focal point, I'm not getting any read, what's going on, this is horrible. The white splash on the side looked great in the reference, and then I turned it into my painting and it just looks horrible. The painting isn't working. And again, it's just, you have to be careful. Your references are not going to allow you to carry the focal point over. A painting is very different. A painting is a completely different experience with a focal point for a viewer. So I kept kind of depending too much on my sharpen tool and hoping that would bring it out, but it had to be a manual thing. It was all manual. I had to go in there and lighten the lower eyelid bags and the eye creases all up by my hand. I couldn't fake it with some sort of contrast filter or something like that. It was a manual thing that I had to rearrange. I had to dim down that far brightness on the right. I had to dim all of that on the left, sorry. I had to dim all of that down so it wasn't washing over everything. It was a very difficult study. So be careful when your references are telling you, hey, this is a beautiful white wash of light over the farthest half of the face, off the center of the canvas towards the edge of the canvas. Hey, this looks great. Why don't you try to capture that? And your mind will want to use that as a reference, but be very careful. Remember, if you are in the in-field experience, if you are in the dashboard, how will you feel when you have a big stretch of white moving across the farthest, most unimportant corner of the canvas, and your focal point, which is the portrait T-zone, is entirely midtones and no blacks? I need to find that reference and attach it, or maybe I'll attach it with you guys. I'm a little bit worried about attaching references I took directly off of Netflix, because Netflix does not allow you to screenshot. I had to kind of like hack my way into that. So I'm not sure if I can post it. It was directly off of Netflix. It's not something on Google. So I'll have to figure out a way to get you guys to see it. I might just share it on the Discord community. But yeah, it was a very bad reference choice. I chose it all based off the expression of the actor. I didn't choose it based off the light, which is always the most important thing to do. Choose your references based off the light. Choose references that will work as a painting. Not every reference works as a painting. Write that back to me. Just be careful with how you're going to manually reinforce the focal point that has been lost. Some of the things that I would have loved to do is just to figure out the whole cheek neck area, because the actor is chubby in this version of Pablo, which is later in the years before his death, probably like 2 years, 1 year before his death. So they were trying to keep it as close as possible to his body type, and I just couldn't figure it out for the life of me, because there was bounce light coming off his shirt, but the shirt I did not paint. So does that mean that I do not include the bounce light that was caused by the shirt? So I didn't. And that means that I had the head on the neck edge, and the neck was dark, and the jawline was a sharp edge. But in the reference, he has a collarbone, and a collar for the shirt, and a very, very white shirt on. And that bounced back up on the lower part of his chin, and he's a bit chubby, so he's got that double chin thing. So there was just seamless movement from face to neck. And if I tried to do that in my painting, I'd have just drawn like what's his name? Not Chewbacca, the other one, the big monstrous worm guy from Star Wars, and a necklace monster is what my painting ended up looking like. And that is not what I read from the reference. And that's because a reference is a photograph. It gets away with whatever it wants to get away with. It's a photo. It has all the details right where they need to be, and more details than we'd see with our human eye. So the photo got to get away with that. I couldn't get away with that because I didn't have the rendering power to match with that, unless it was photorealism, and then that would have been ridiculous. So I tried to kind of figure out my way around that neck area to not make him look like all chubby, excessively chubby, by going back to my fundamentals. So I cast a dark value for the lower half of the face, and remembered the sphere and the core shadow and the beard shadow. And then I remembered that, the far part of the temple needs to be seamed back in like it's the far side of the cube. So I really, really had to move back into my fundamentals there for a while to figure that out, because it is such a small little area, but because the reference is there tugging you in the wrong direction, you forget everything that you ever learned. You forget everything you thought you knew. And you go in there and fundamentals seem like a joke, because, that's not going to help me. But fundamentals absolutely are what guided me across this painting and helped me understand what it is that I had to do. So right now in the background, I just darkened the background, and that was how I managed to keep that splash of white across half the face whiter without me actually making it whiter. I darkened the background. I knew I couldn't make it any more whiter because I'm here trying to keep the right eye as focused as possible. And I couldn't keep raising that white in the back because that's what was in the reference. So I darkened the background just a touch, and it ended up just looking right. So trust your instincts. Be sure to not trust your reference too much. A reference can lead to failure if it's a badly chosen reference, or a reference beyond your skill level, or a reference with lighting that is not necessarily the kind of lighting an artist would choose or a master would choose for a painting. Not every reference works as a painting, and you end up receiving is a little bit of an obvious struggle, an obvious anxiety, and my anxiety was very, very visible through the sharpen tool and the unsharp mask. I use that way too much, and you guys will get the full resolution image, so you'll be able to zoom in. And in the PSD, I have saved all the layers of the progress, so you can see all the layers of failure that came before the final piece. And remember that the only reason why this piece succeeded is because I critiqued myself. It succeeded if it did succeed. Honestly, I don't think it did. There's a lot missing. But there are areas that are 100%, I think, rendered. And those areas are because I critiqued myself. I removed myself from the struggle, from the personal struggle, and I tried to keep it as objective as possible in the way I approached every single critique. And every single critique happened at the start of the new session. So it didn't happen at the end of a 3-hour session, because you're in tunnel vision by then. You're in quicksand. You're done for. Every mistake you're going to make, you're doing it with a bias. But when you are with a bias, but when you are in your new session and you just started, 5-10 hours have passed, and you've just looked at the painting for the first time, that's when you make your biggest hacks, your biggest jabs at it, your biggest cuts in the painting, your massive liquefy changes, your transform changes, your big brush strokes that just completely erase a whole section and start it over again. That's when it happens, because that's when the image is freshest in your mind. That's when it looks ugliest, and that's when you'll see the biggest mistakes. And you just keep doing that, and it'll just get more and more complete, and suddenly out of nowhere it'll all transform into something you never thought you could do. Your success isn't a measure of an explosive skill that happens in a 30-minute interval. Your success is your ability to succeed despite your desire to toss the painting, succeeding despite the desire to stop painting, painting despite the desire to stop. That's the measure of success, in my opinion. The painting, an amazing painting, is an accumulation of explosions of skill across a period of time, with a healthy amount of break in between. So you're layering your skill level every time you restart the painting or go back to the painting after a break. So the first time you put it down, that was one extent of your skill. Then the second time layers on top of the previous session you did with new skill that you've fixed previous choices with and advanced them. Then the next time you're layering on top of that, and every time you start the painting, you are layering more and more episodes of your skill reinforced by previous episodes. And that's what leads to a master painting. It's not something that you can do right away. If I were to sketch something right now in front of you in 30 minutes, you would think that I was not even the same artist that draws all these realistic portraits. And it's the truth. I'm not. My paintings are a team effort between me and previous me's across the week. And you have to start understanding that. You will not paint an explosive, perfect masterpiece unless you're like 30 or 40 years into the business and you know exactly what you're doing, and it's just it's still going to be a painterly painting, believe you me. It's not going to be something that is refined. Refining takes time. Critiquing yourself takes time. You have to take a break in order to see your mistakes. There's no way to rush that. It's like rushing the growth of a plant. There's really no way you can rush that aspect. It's like rushing how you improve or how you advance your skill. There's no way to rush your skill level other than, study, and that's not rushing, that's perfecting. So believe in the fact that you will succeed in the painting if you revisit it, but remember that emotional attachment will remove you from objective perspective and will lead you to making mistakes. Do not trust your reference all the way. Trust your reference for the fundamentals. Don't trust it for what the focal point or the photographer did, because the photographer isn't always going to take the best picture. And do what you can in order to reassert the fundamentals and the focal point and the composition. And don't panic. And if you find yourself panicking, hide the part of the painting that you feel like is no longer important at this or after a certain stage, and focus all your attention on the focal point as you need it. And you'll find that if you do that per section, hide everything, focus one section at a time, there's a lot less anxiety you're susceptible to, and you end up with a successful study. I wouldn't say it's a masterpiece or a successful illustration or a painting. It's not a story-based illustration. It's just a study of a face. And there was so much more to this actor's face that I would have loved to capture. But some of it may have been beyond my skill level. Some of it may have just been something that I needed to work on some more. But my patience was done and I couldn't keep doing it. So thank you everyone for watching. I hope this was an insightful little journey into my experience with this study. I encourage you guys to try this. Get into some male faces. See what you can do. If you've drawn only male faces, try some female faces. It really, really is very, very trying. And it's the most wonderful exercise. I'll see you guys next month. Bye.